Man is a history-making creature who can neither repeat his past nor leave it behind. W. H. Auden. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I am your host. I'd like to thank everyone who's been listening, and any newcomers, welcome. I hope you enjoy. Let's go ahead and dive on into it. This episode is probably going to be a little bit shorter in terms of length, especially compared to last week's episode, which ran a lot longer than I thought it would. But I'm recovering from a very fun but also very long weekend where some friends of mine got married in town. There have been a lot of festivities and partying going on, so I am very tired and I need to recover, but I will try to do my best and get at least a decent number of things covered. And so to do that, we're going to kind of go over what we will be discussing. And for that, we're going to be talking about a few other sites and peoples living in what is now modern Pakistan before we move into sites in what is now modern India. But before we start with that, though, I do need to go over some feedback and a point that I wanted to clarify from something I had said last time. So the clarification is to talk about the possible adaptation of crops from the West. I should have emphasized that the reason for the potential adaptation of these strains would have been mostly related to the amount of usable grain these stocks would provide. I made it sound like that they might have been better suited to the environment, and that may have been true, but I think any kind of adoption would have been more due to volume of food as opposed to, climate suitability. Though it's possible that both was the case. Also, I read a very interesting article, and I forget the gentleman's name, but I will be talking about it when I do our next domestication episode, where we talk about the next run of crops that have been domesticated and are being added to, the human equipment list. And he was part of a project that mathematically broke down a lot of wild and semi-domesticated vegetation that had been found in some of these sites that we've been talking about, and it kind of broke down mathematically the percentage of what crops were used and what were not. And it's kind of thrown a really big kind of counter argument to the so-called founder crops that has kind of been the norm or the accepted meta, for lack of a better term, of human agricultural adoption. And I'm going to be talking about that, but it was a very interesting article, and I wrote down the name, but I forgot to add it to my notes, and unfortunately, I don't have where I wrote it down available at the moment. So, but it's something we will discuss. Now, as for the feedback I got, I would like to thank our listener Ram for linking me a couple of examples of armies using the Bolan Pass for invasions into and out of India. I'm looking forward to researching and talking about them, even though it may take a little while to get to them. And Ram, I do thank you, and I know that we've messaged since this bit of feedback, but I hope you continue to listen and enjoy. Now, though, I would like to talk about some of the other sites sites and peoples that can be dated to around this time frame in this area, and who the peoples we have and are going to talk about may have been. So we've talked previously about Homo sapiens reaching India fairly quickly, quickly after leaving Africa. And there are a number of sites that these early pioneers flocked to. Several of them are located in the Shiva Hills, which are the outer foothills of the Himalayas, kind of where they meet the Indian subcontinent. These run from kind of the headwaters of the Indus in what is now Pakistan, and they run all the way across northern India and Nepal, almost right up to the Brahmaputra River in the east, so right on that Bangladesh border with India. And the rock shelters and caves were in use by other hominids who had left Africa for this region as well. The oldest evidence, I believe, of Homo erectus outside of Africa has been found in this range. And these were valuable locations when it comes to gathering materials for tools. And this gave rise to a tool culture known as the Sonian, which gets its name from the Son River Valley of Pakistan, where the tool types were first uncovered. And then later similar sites were found, all along the range. Now this culture is controversial, and there are those that argue that it shouldn't actually be classified as a distinct tool culture. And this is due to a lot of different factors, and even those that say it did exist argue heavily on the dates of when it did exist. But the absolute latest it would have existed was right at the end of the Younger Dryas period, so kind of at the start of our timeline, or right before our timeline, or our current focus on the timeline ended. However, even after this period, there are a number of artifacts that suggest the Son River Valley site remained in use by whatever peoples broke away or evolved from the Sonian. Now, whether this could be considered a true tool culture or not. And this is kind of more, again, on the anthropology archaeological side, and it's well beyond kind of the focus of what we're going to be doing here at this time frame. And, I don't know enough about tool manufacture to really speak too heavily and weigh in on my opinion on this, but just keep in mind that is something that has been debated. So the Son River Valley site remains in use even after the other Shivalik hill sites are abandoned as habitation or camping sites. This is probably due to the Son being an easy access point to the rest of the Shivalik hills. The ground around the river is fertile, but it's also very rocky, which means it's never going to become a massive site. People living there continue to mostly rely on gathering, fishing, and hunting, while they use the various varieties of nearby stone for tools, trinkets, trade, what have you. And the reason this probably remained in use is because it was an excellent location to enter into and out of the Shivalik range. It makes it an excellent hub for travel. Also, the name of the hills means Shiva's tresses. And this is true for all of the different groups, language families that live in the hills or nearby the hills. They all have some version of the name Shiva attached to this little mountain range. Now, I couldn't get a firm etymology of the Son. I've read some sources that call it the Swan, but that seems to be an English corruption and not actually tied to the name in Urdu, and because that just means 100. 100 what? I couldn't get any, theories on what it meant. But basically, the English who came to the area, they heard son and thought swan, so they would refer to it sometimes as swan, not realizing that it was something else. Or some did, obviously, but then there was some that they just wrote down what they heard. Which is how you get a number of names for rivers in other places of the world. This is not the only place that's happened. Let's see. Now, there are a number of other sites that begin to see increasing use at this time, but they're not yet practicing a domesticated lifestyle, farming or herding or anything like that. And they remain relatively small. However, by the time we return to this region, a number of people living at these locations will start and then fully adopt an agricultural lifestyle. Some sites and the peoples living there will eventually belong to what is known as the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization, while others remain on the periphery of that system in small isolated villages or as part of those who prefer the mobile hunter or pastoralist lifestyles. Some of these sites are Timargar, Rana Gundhai, and Anjira, and there are many, many others. We will talk about some of these as they become more permanent settlements or larger settlements in our later episodes. For now, though, we're going to go ahead and cross the modern-day border and talk about some of these early settlements in modern India. And the best place to start with that is the site of Bhirrana. This site was first excavated between 2003 and 2006. And the dates on this site are debated, at least the start of the site. But the signs of continuous sedentary, proto-agricultural lifestyle being practiced lines up very closely with Mehrgarh, with Bhirrana possibly being slightly older and lasting to around the same time frame as when Mehrgarh is abandoned. The date ranges given are either, depending on the source, 7,500 or 7,000 BCE, up until around 2,600 BCE. The name is related to the Hindi word for crowd, which, a fitting name for an early city, I expect. But as obviously we don't know what the settlement would have been called by the people living there. And it is located in the modern Indian state of Haryana. Now, despite the shared antiquity of both Mehrgarh and Bhirrana, these sites are about as far away from each other as Göbekli Tepe and Catalhoyuk, give or take 40 kilometers. So you could easily expect for there to be differences between the two sites, just as there were plenty of differences between Göbekli Tepe and Catalhoyuk. And you would be right. And these will last until even after the Harappan period begins. To start, Bhirrana's homes appear to have been semi-subterranean, with floors being dug down into the earth. And in contrast with Mehrgarh's, squared, quartered homes. Bhirrana's homes also appear to have been plastered, similar to the way some homes on Cyprus had been with limestone. They instead of using limestone, they use kind of this yellow alluvium from a nearby river, the Gahagar River. And this river is very interesting. It is a kind of a seasonal river. It is not fully flowing all year. It's mainly picks up and becomes a true river after seasonal rains and snow melts and things like that. And its course is one that has shifted wildly through the years because, again, it's not a permanent river. And this is one of the rivers that is kind of like a put forward as the Sarasvati River, which is a little mysterious and one of the big archaeological mysteries and historical and mythological mysteries in Indian history. There are a number of candidates for the Sarasvati, and the Gara River is but one of those, I guess, suspects, for lack of a better term. But we'll dive well into that stuff much later. But one of the individuals who found and excavated Bhirrana has a number of theories about the site, and he links it to a culture known as the Hakra ware culture. And this is kind of this is a culture that was considered contemporaneous with the later Harappan culture. But he seems to draw that this may have been, I guess, the proto-site for what will become the Hakra ware culture. Or at the very least, he claims that it shows that the Hakra ware culture began before the Harappan culture did, and they were not necessarily, they were obviously contemporaneous, but the Hakra ware culture is slightly older, and that that they influenced the Harappan culture, and in some places may have evolved into the Harappan culture. But that's stuff that we'll again get into a little bit more detail later, because that is not happening at this point in our timeline. This is just right now. Bhirrana is a place that is, again, an early adapter of large-scale organized agriculture and like permanent settlements, and it will probably not begin to see the Hakra ware emerge until probably about 5,000, maybe a little bit later, BCE, though pottery, I believe, does show up at the very end of our timeline here, right at 6,000 BCE. But it does not have the distinctive Hakra ware, I guess, style or aesthetics. But yeah, so, and there are some other sites that we will dive into next time that are, again, they're like those other sites in Pakistan that we mentioned. They're not quite at the point where they're adapting agriculture, at least fully, and there's still evidence of, seasonal or, semi-seasonal migration. But we're seeing these places that had been, rock shelters, sanctuaries, essentially, for these earlier hunter-gatherer groups begin to be used by people, adapting a different lifestyle, but they're well suited to, again, agriculture. So that you're beginning to see more of these sites slowly begin that process of urbanization, which obviously I think I've mentioned this before, and I've used the term sparingly or tried to, but it is a slightly different sense of urbanization at that time than what we think of it when we would think of that term now. But as you can guess from the long history of this site, much like Marigar, we will be returning to Bhirrana in the future. Now, next week, we're going to talk about some of the other sites, kind of in this northern part, or I should say, northeastern part of what is, or I'm sorry, northwestern part of what is now India. Next week, I think we'll go a little bit further west, but we're going to remain kind of in the northern area of India along the Ganges River basin. And we might move a little bit into Bangladesh before we return, I guess, to southern India. I need to check my sources and my notes and just see which episode I could probably do a little bit longer on, because I tend not to like to have short episodes back to back. But there is one other thing I want to talk about in this week's episode, and it would apply to a number of sites. Well, it would apply to virtually, the sites in the next episode as well. The ones in the Ganges Delta and the ones further to the south in the Deccan region of southern India, Sri Lanka, and all that kind of stuff. But that would be the question of language. Now, I haven't really talked too much about languages the last couple of episodes, mainly because it's very hard to know, because I feel like the languages spoken at that time, there's a lot of missing information, and it will there will be more, appropriate places to focus on that in the future. However, India is a very special case, and I think probably I think it's a safe assumption based on everything we have right now, and we'll get into this a lot more in the future as well, because this is something that is going to take a lot of discussion, but there are some factors in this discussion that I'm not going to dive in too much later, but because we're missing a lot of context, and I want to add that context as we progress, and not just kind of just dump it all out and then just completely ignore it for another season or two and then come back to it later. But my guess is, and I think this is something that's a fairly popular theory, is that the peoples living in the areas we've talked about for the last 2 or 3 episodes, possibly even 4, we're speaking kind of a proto-Dravidic language. Now, Dravidian is a language family. It's one of the big language families in the world. There are over, I believe, 200 and I want to say it's like 275 million people speak a Dravidic language. And they are mostly situated, at least these days, in central and southern India. But there are places that still speak a Dravidic language in Pakistan and in the north east of India. And I believe that there are a couple of small groups in kind of the Indian Pakistan border region as well. And those are, they're all divided now. It's been divided into kind of subdivisions. You have the northern, the central, the south central, and the southern families. A modern Dravidic language is Tamil, but there's also Telugu is another one, I believe. And my bet and guess, based on, again, everything we know, is that the people living in this region at this time frame are probably speaking, if not Dravidian, or obviously Dravidian has broken apart, that happens later, but this Proto-Dravidic, or like a Dravidic precursor, they're probably speaking a cousin of Dravidic or Proto-Dravidic, if they're not speaking the Proto-Dravidic themselves. And again, we'll get into why I believe this is the case a lot later. But that's kind of, that I fall well into that kind of side of things. And yeah, I think that's kind of a good place to stop from now. little short 23 minute episode here. But yeah, I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you have any feedback, please let me know. You can reach me, of course, at waradrevpod@gmail.com. You can also reach me via direct message on Twitter, or you can comment on any of our YouTube videos that I've been uploading, our backlog to. I've got, right now, 3 more set to go up this week. The Aceramic Cypress episode really kicked off, and we've picked up I think 7 or 8 new subscribers in the last week or so. So that's been good. We're getting a little bit more popular and getting a lot more listens. So I do want to thank you all for continuing to listen, and I hope you all continue to do so, and that you have enjoyed the podcast. So again, please feel free. Feedback, constructive criticism, whatever you'd like to send me. I am always willing to listen and try to learn and I guess refine my process in the show here. So thank you all. I hope you have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week. Until the next time, thank you all. Goodbye.